All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Cape Cod Maritime Museum's Winter 2023 lecture series. We're very happy to have everyone here with us today. This is probably one of the biggest lectures in terms of numbers that we've had so far, so I'm super excited. For those of you that are new here, my name is Elizabeth York. I am the Executive Director at the Cape Cod Maritime Museum. Just a quick note, today's lecture is sponsored by the Mid-Cape Cultural Council, as well as the Mass Cultural Council, as well as our 2023 corporate sponsors, Cape Air, Highline Cruises, and Avangrid. So a big thank you to everyone that I just mentioned for their generous support of our museum and everything that we do. It's also important to note that programs like this lecture today are made possible by the support of folks like yourselves. And I know I sound like PBS here, but I really urge you to consider donating or become a member today. Your support helps us host programs just like this. And so please consider donating today and keeping these programs going. So before we get started, just a few reminders about our Zoom lecture format. Please be sure to keep your microphone muted and your video off so that all of the attention can be on our speaker today. If you run into any technical issues, please don't hesitate to send me a message via the chat function and we can try to figure that out. Also, if you have a question for today's speaker, you can type that into the Q&A section that's down on your bottom toolbar there. It says Q&A. Please feel free to type that question in there at any point, but our speaker will be taking questions at the end, so we will be holding off on questions. So I'm going to introduce Bob Reilly. I'm so excited that he's joining us today. Bob Reilly learned to sail in 1974, where he joined the Explorer's Post, racing lightnings on the Hudson River. After college, Bob joined the Darien New Cannan Power Squadron, where he earned the rank of advanced pilot. He taught the safe boating course and sailed extensively from Virginia to Massachusetts and throughout the U.S. and the British Virgin Islands. So Bob currently resides in Pauling, New York with his wife, Nancy. Bob has two amazing daughters, Megan and Morgan. You might recognize the name Megan because Megan is our wonderful and incredibly talented youth programs director and director of the Young Mariner program. And it's because of her today that Bob is being brought to us. So thank you so much for joining us, Bob. We're so excited to have you here, and take it away.
Okay, so you're probably wondering, why does some yokel from backwoods Pauling, New York, even think that he is qualified to present on the Pendleton Fort Mercer rescues? Well, it all goes back to 2016 when we saw The Finest Hours. And with a little research, I found out that CG 36500 still existed, and it was up in Rock Harbor. And we come up here to the Cape every summer, and we went to the CG 36500, and it's amazing that they fit 36 people onto this little life raft. I went to the souvenir shack where I purchased this T-shirt, and I went to the woman selling the shirt in the shack. I said, yeah, I know that Disney changed the movie and Bernie and Miriam Weber were already married. They weren't newly engaged like the movie showed. And the woman says to me, yeah, I know, because they were my mother and father. I was instantly obsessed. I had to learn everything I could about what happened during the wrecks, the literally breaking apart of these two ships. So I have found information on the storm, on the ships, on the rescues. It had a much, much happier outcome than the song that was playing at the beginning here. I think, if I remember my numbers correctly, they only lost 11 of 80 sailors. So I'm going to share my screen now and start my presentation. Here we go. So it is a true story. You can still hear me all right?
Yep, all good, Bob.
Okay. So on February 17th, 1952, 71 years ago, a low developed off of Delaware. We can see that, it was raining / snowing. And 29.64 inches of mercury is low, but not terrible. You know, it's a rainstorm. It was overcast. Whoops. You can see the freezing line. The winds on the Beaufort scale were 18 to 21 knots. And overnight, it very rapidly deepened into what's known as a mid-latitude cyclone. Bombogenesis, it was the first time I heard bombogenesis, where the pressure drops rapidly, the storm increases in ferocity rapidly, and it just became, they call it a cyclone because hurricanes happen during hurricane seasons, and it happened in the middle latitudes off Delaware rather than in the tropics. So it had all of the ferocity of a hurricane, but in February. Okay, Massachusetts got somewhere between 1 foot and 2 feet of snow. And then here closer on Cape Cod, it got down to freezing. 43 people passed on land due to the snowfall and the storm. Okay, here are some observations at the Nantucket Weather Station. When the dew point and the temperature are the same, that means that the air is completely saturated with moisture and it's raining, snowing, sleeting, whatever it may be doing. The air can't hold any more moisture, and so it's coming out of it. You can see the barometric, the bombogenesis here as the barometric pressure drops rapidly. The steep pressure gradient, that's what causes winds, and the direction from the north. Waves are created by the speed of wind and the length that the wind travels over the water. Here we had the 140-mile fetch. That was kicking up some pretty big waves. Here, let me move this over. There we go. So we had a bad storm. Now let's talk about these ships, the T2 tankers, because both the Pendleton and the Fort Mercer were T2 tankers. Over 5 million gallons of fuel oil, kerosene, what have you, in the tanks. The bridge and the radio room were forward. Cruise quarters, engine room, and electrical generators were aft. This becomes very important. Okay, the only connection between the two was a catwalk. Okay, over 500 of these ships were built during the war effort of World War II. Can you believe a ship built from laying the keel to off the dry dock in 70 days? One ship was actually completed in just 33 days. So I'm guessing that, you know, maybe inspections weren't as complete as they needed to be. They started using welded joints. Here on the right, we have a riveted ship. Now, the importance of this is when a riveted plank sheet cracks, just that sheet cracks. The rivets don't allow the crack to travel. With the welded, you basically turn the entire steel structure into one sheet, and so the crack can travel, which is what happened. We had civilian workers. All of the able-bodied men were off fighting the war, and so we had trained but inexperienced workers doing a new process that, so, you know, we're kind of stacking the deck here a little bit. They also used something called dirty steel, which had a lot of sulfur in it, which behaves like saltwater taffy. When it's nice and warm, it's malleable, but you stick it in the freezer and you can wallop it with a hammer and just crack it into pieces. January 16th, 1943, still waters. The boat was at the dock, and look what happened. After the sea trials, just sitting and resting, The harbor was cold. The crack of the ship splitting in two was so loud, the sound carried over a mile. 1947, there's the Dearborn in two pieces. Again, just broke in two. So this was a known issue. And they started installing things known as crack arresters, steel bars across the sections to hopefully prevent this. Okay, here's a color photograph of the Pendleton after she was floated off dry dock, but before she was completely outfitted. And John Fitzgerald was commander. Crack arresters installed at this point. Okay, Fort Mercer, very similar looking ship, built in Pennsylvania rather than the West Coast. Okay, also had the crack arresters. Okay, now what happened? 1951, a fracture was found forward on the Pendleton. They didn't fix it. July of 1951, the Pendleton runs aground in the Hudson River near New York. Now, the only place I can think that a tanker would go on the Hudson would be up to Newburgh, and yes, it's very shallow in places up there. You can see that it sat in between tanks 6 through 9 for an entire day on the hard. This is also where the ship broke in two. Right in the center there where she was on the ground. Literally a month before she passes Coast Guard inspection with flying colors. February 12th, both ships are in New Orleans. Okay, the Pendleton's heading for Boston and full of kerosene and diesel. The Fort Mercer is down in Norco, Louisiana, heading for Portland. There was a ship aground in the main channel out. So the Fort Mercer had its forward and aft tanks empty so that it wouldn't sit as deeply in the water, and it could take a alternative route out to the Gulf of Mexico. And so they both headed out and up the East Coast, and they basically followed into the storm. That's their intended destinations. Okay, Pendleton arrives off of Boston. They can't see a darn thing. Okay, it is just awful there. So they decide to head back out into open water at a slow rate of speed. And it gets worse and worse, and we see the full nor'easter mid-latitude cyclone occurring. The Pendleton gets beyond Provincetown and turns south and starts heading south. Begins shipping waves over the stern. Okay, Chief Engineer Siebert says, don't send anyone back here. They're going to get wet. Okay, 5:50 in the morning, an explosive bang, another one, and within 5 seconds, the ship breaks in two. Okay, remember how I said the generators were in the stern, the radio was in the forward. There was no way for them to send out an SOS. Siebert's now, well, half a ship's master. The flares are still left over from World War II, and in this wind, smoke are just completely ineffective. Ship's cook, Tiny Myers, goes up. He's the only one strong enough to pull the ship's horn, and so he's out on deck in this weather, just blowing the ship's horn. An artist's rendering of what it looked like. Now, Another place where Disney changed the movie, and I think this was to add just a little more urgency to it, they were floating perfectly well. There wasn't a crack that was filling the engine room. So now here we are an hour and a half later, and a crack is heard aboard the Fort Mercer. They start seeing oil leaking out of tank 5. The captain does radio the Coast Guard, says, but it's not a big problem yet. But the Coast Guard still sends the East Wing and Unimac towards the Fort Mercer. They're 120 miles away, so it's going to take them a little time to get there. 10:30 now, a second crack is heard aboard the Fort Mercer. More oil coming out of tank 5. Now he calls the Coast Guard 20 minutes later, and the Coast Guard replies that we have 3 cutters on our way to you. 11:40, third crack was heard aboard the Fort Mercer. It's now reached above the waterline. Captain sends SOS. And sure enough, the Fort Mercer separates at tank 5. Swings around and starts heading back down onto the stern part of the Fort Mercer. This is unique in maritime history because the ship had to operate evasive maneuvers to prevent the collision with itself. Okay, so the Coast Guard is aware of the Fort Mercer. They come out of Stage Harbor, which is a much more protected harbor, and Nantucket. Well, CG 36383's got a bad radio, so it heads to the lightship. CG 36524 can't make it out there, heads to the lightship. These are tough ocean-going powered lifeboats. Crewmen aboard the Pendleton actually see the beach. More importantly, Nickerson sees the Pendleton and hears the horn, rushes to the Coast Guard station, lets them know that, hey, there's another wreck out there. And they say, yeah, we kind of see something out there on our radar, but this thing's been acting up. It's newish technology, and so we don't know. They actually then divert a Catalina to investigate from the Fort Mercer over to see where the Pendleton pieces are. And sure enough, it's confirmed at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, it broke into the 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they finally found out that, yes, indeed, we have 2 ships in 4 pieces. So CG 383, 36383 head towards the Pendleton. Bosun's mate Bernie Weber sent to North Beach to attempt to rescue it from shore in a duck boat. The Pendleton had already gotten too far past. Bernie had also spent the early part of the day tying up the fishing ships, getting the fishing boats, getting them secured for the storm. So he's already worked a full day. Okay, a Navy ship arrives at the Fort Mercer, but it doesn't have the equipment to render aid. But it stays, it says the Yakutat is on its way. It'll be here in 3 hours, and the short splice remains on station over a day. Chief Clough, the head of the Chatham Coast Guard Station, says you got to go out there in 36-500 and assist the ship. Now, in the best of days, the Chatham Bar is a tricky chunk of water. These are the 3 fellows who volunteered to go with Bernie. Irvin Maskey was waiting to go out to his lightship, so he wasn't even part of the normal rescue crew. Andrew Fitzgerald was a volunteer because Bernie's normal engineman was down with the flu. and Richard Lively was just there to step up. Okay. Back in those days, the Coast Guard motto was you had to go out. You didn't necessarily had to come back. Okay, so here we can see Stage Harbor where the first boats went out, the Chatham Coast Guard Station, and the Chatham Bar. This is where they picked up the fishing boat, and that's their route out of the harbor. Just as they were passing the station, Chatham Coast Guard Station, Bernie radioed. He says, proceed as planned. Now, John Stella says to Weber, you know, person could get lost in Chatham Harbor. Why don't you just motor around for a little bit and say you couldn't find your way out? Bernie says, no, I'm going out. Not only that, I'm not going to wear a life jacket because I can, you know, handle the ship better. I won't be as restricted in my movements. Then he tells Stello, please call my wife and tell her what's going on. She was home with the flu. So again, a difference from the movie. She was not in the station. She was home. She didn't know any of this was going on until after it was all over. The boat is literally launched into the air, smashes the windshield, embedding glass into Bernie's face and knocking the compass away. The boat rolls, the engine stalls. It was a gas engine at this point with a carburetor. And Andrew Fitzgerald goes down to restart the engine, but every time he goes down there, he gets bumped around and burnt on the hot exhaust manifold and such down below. It's too shallow for the McCulloch to reach the bow. They see a lone man on the bridge who's immediately washed overboard. So all of the crew who were in the bridge on the Pendleton were lost. So there's no reason for 36-383 to remain out there, and heads back to the lightship. The Yak Attack makes it to the Fort Mercer, tries to shoot a line across the Fort Mercer, but gets caught in the radio antenna, and they instruct the crew to get to the bow for a better chance of rescue. Okay, so what they have to do, well, Bernie feels his way. He doesn't have the compass with him, so he feels his way out towards where he thinks the Pendleton ought to be. It was drifting this way. The wind is doing this. The waves are doing that. I'm going this way. As he's going down these waves, he's got to throw the thing in the reverse to prevent breaching and rolling the lifeboat over. And of course, it loses primes and stalls many times. It gets worse. They like I said, see a deeper darkness in the black, sends Fitzgerald forward to the spotlight, hits a wave, which throws him back into the cockpit, but he's unhurt. And then they find the stern of the Pendleton. One person up on deck. The lights come on, and suddenly over 30 crew show up on the side rails of the Pendleton. CG 36-500 is made to carry 12 people, 4 crewmen, 8 passengers. Bernie says, I'm not God. We're all going to live or we're all going to die. We're taking them all. He maneuvers along and the crew start climbing down the ladders. They jump, fall, crash into the CG-36-500. Some of them fall into the water. Some slammed into the side of the ship as it's rocking and rolling. Pulled out by Maskey, Lively, and Fitzgerald. Become sluggish after you got 24 people in the thing. Okay. Tiny Myers was up there the whole time pulling on the ship's horn. The man was in the final stages of hypothermia. Honestly, he wasn't going to survive anyway, but he falls from the ladder between the two boats, the ship and the boat, and he is killed when the two hit again together. The second wave throws 36-500 clear, and literally the stern half rolls over on its side. So this would have been surprising. I think this is maybe why they had the engine room filling in the movie, is because that was a known problem, and this would have been just a complete surprise. But literally minutes after they get everyone off, the ship rolls onto its side. Almost midnight. What does Bernie do? Does he head out to open water and ride out the storm, or does he head to the beach and try to run up on the shore? He chooses to go for shore, receives orders to rendezvous with the McCulloch. Now, these are 32 men who just went through hell, climbing down the ladder and falling into frigid waters. And Bernie's saying, no, I'm not going to make them climb up another ladder. No, we're going for shore. I'm not going to lose them now. He actually finds Chatham Light, Harbor Light, and he's in safe waters. They cross the bar almost without knowing it. They get to the fishing dock, and they see just a few, the onlookers see just a few people. Oh gosh, they didn't rescue all that many. What are we going to do? But then the sardines start coming out of the can. 31 more. These are actual photos from that night. They're brought up to the Coast Guard station from the fishing pier to keep them warm and get them dry. Look at Bernie there. He is just totally wiped, and as you can see, not wearing his life preserver. So the people who were told to go forward on the Fort Mercer used their signal flags to climb down to the catwalk. John Reilly, no relation, misses the catwalk and is washed overboard. 8 more make their way to the forecastle. Okay, the yak attack sends a string of lighted rafts down on the bow of the ship, but the line breaks. 2 men on the Fort Mercer didn't know it, and they're lost. Yak attack returns after 2 hours. Higgins thinks it's close enough, jumps, and is lost. The yak attack says, okay, we're backing away. We're holding off until daylight. So here we are in the morning. We've got the Unimac and Eastwind and the Cushnet arrive at the stern. Passes over walkie-talkies. 3 choose to stay aboard with the chief engineer. Okay, this is a photo from the newspaper of the day. However, he disguised the Acushnet is an ocean-going tug, so it's got a big, huge prop with a low pitch, so it is very maneuverable and actually backs up to the Fort Mercer, and the crew step across onto the Coast Guard cutter. Okay, the yak attack lowers a Monomoy surf boat, makes it over to the Fort Mercer. They insist the captain goes first. The surf boat is really beat up. You can see along the bottom of the photo there how the rail is just cracked in. They're not going to be able to do this again. Okay, they shoot a line over, tie a raft to it. Gilden and Farner Gilden finds the raft is capsized. He uses all of his energy to right the boat. Farner jumps in to save Gilden. They get in the raft. Their fingers are so cold they can't open their pocket knives to cut the line free from the Fort Mercer. The yak attack performs the wishbone maneuver, hoping that they get the bigger part of the wishbone with the life raft. And sure enough, that's what happens. And the two are pulled to safety. Right after they leave the bow, the Fort Mercer bow capsizes. Okay, that's Officer Clough, who sent Bernie out. That's Frederick Patel. He was really, he had hypothermia as well. And then here are the other 4 survivors of the bow of the Fort Mercer. This all made nationwide news. I mean, you can see Chicago, New York Times, Boston. It was national news. Bernie sleeps for 18 hours after this. He finds over 200. The members of the Pendleton crew emptied their pockets of money and gave it to Bernie. Now John Stello calls Miriam to say what happened. What does Bernie do with the $200? He buys Chatham Coast Guard Station their very first TV. These are the other lifeboat crews that went out. Okay, Coast Guard headquarters calls Weber and says, we're awarding you the gold life-saving medal. And you know what? Your crew, the rest of your crew is getting the silver life-saving medal. What do you think of that? I think it stinks. Why should I receive better than they? They were there. They took the same risks. If you don't give them the gold, I don't want it either. Well, all 4 got the gold along with 20 other men. And here is the ceremony. There's Maskey getting his. Here's the press release from the Coast Guard. These are the medals that were awarded. In 1968, they put her to bed. The National Seashore wanted to display it in Eastham. There wasn't the money to do it. In 1981, Bill Quinn was looking for some government surplus vehicles to purchase at an auction, sees the hull as is shown in this photo, and please excuse me for this exact quote, but he said, "Holy shit, this is that boat." Okay, within 6 months, the Orleans Historical Society raised the money and restored the boat and relaunched with Bernie and Miriam there. They first offered it to Chatham, but Chatham couldn't take it on. Orleans could. And here she is after her restoration. Okay. In 2018, they wanted to take her to locate it to Washington, where the Coasties could be the only ones to see her. I was asked to write a letter, and I said this would be like taking the bull from the bottom of Wall Street. This belongs on Cape Cod. It is Cape Cod. You don't do this. Orleans Historical Society, Bill Quinn said she belongs to the people of Cape Cod. Here's the original crew at the 50th anniversary in 2002. In 2011, the Coast Guard launches the first Sentinel-class color, the Bernard C. Weber. Okay, she's not done. 1983, they're going on a tour around Cape Cod Bay, and they see a flare, and a 17-foot power boat with no engine and no working radio get towed to safety. 1998, on their way to the Boston Antique and Boat Festival, they rescue a 30-foot motorboat and tow her into port. In 2014, while they're out on another tour, they rescue a kayaker after he's swamped by a wave. So she wasn't done yet. And just this year, February 3rd, I saw this. They're looking to build a permanent structure for CG-36-500 next to the Orleans Cultural and Historical Society in Orleans. Would you like more details? Well, there's the movie. It's accurate enough for the big parts. There are also 3 books that you can read, 2 tankers down, and they each pick up different parts of the story, so I highly recommend all 3. Okay, you want to go see her. In Orleans, you take the Mid-Cape Highway all the way out to exit 12, and then take 6A to Eldridge Parkway. Cross over to Tonsett Road, and you can see lots of displays on her there on Schoolhouse Road and Main Street. Want to go see the actual boat? She sits in Rock Harbor in the summertime. You head back across Mid-Cape Highway to Rock Harbor. And here she is, and those 2 lovely ladies are my daughters, and that is from 2016 when my obsession began. And as a good librarian, I do have to quote my sources. And there we have it. So I'm going to stop my share now.
Wow, Bob, that was fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
So I have to admit, I've had the option to watch the film several times, and I haven't. And I actually held off knowing that you were going to be doing this presentation. So I will be watching the very hard task of watching Chris Pine in a film.
Well, yes, it's so rough on the eyes.
I know. So we've got a few questions in the Q and answer section. Please feel free to put any questions in there that you have for Bob about this. The first question we have, Bob, is what is a wishbone maneuver?
Just exactly like you do with a wishbone. You break it in half and you hope you get the center section. So they were hoping that the line between the life raft and the Fort Mercer broke before the line between the Yakutat and the life raft broke.
Mm-hmm. All right, that makes complete sense. I like that. It's a great thing to call it. There was a question from Bob Frizzy, who's one of our longtime Board of Advisors members. Hi, Bob. Great presentation, he says. Was the lightship you mentioned the Pollock Rip?
Yes, it was.
Awesome. Would you please show the screen of the 3 books that you recommended?
Oh, yes, I will bring that right back up.
Wonderful. And while you're doing that, we have a lot of praise in the chat right now. Great presentation. Thank you. Super job. Great job. Thanks for caring enough to tell the story. Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Great job, Bob, from Retta and Chuck. Thanks to all involved. Thank you. What an amazing story. Had me close to tears. Yes, I agree. What really struck me, interestingly, while you're doing that, is the fact that the generator and the radio room were on separate parts of the ship. It's interesting that, especially in naval architecture, you think about redundancy, and
It's interesting that you brought that up. In the Coast Guard investigation after these rescues, they concluded, when this happens again, there should be a battery on the bridge and a radio in the stern.
when this happens again.
When this happens again.
Ugh, lovely.
Yeah.
Another question from Timothy. Did all of the rescuers remain in the Coast Guard after?
I believe so. I do know that one of the things Bernie said about this rescue was the hand of God was guiding the ship on this. And this is not the only time he has had a rescue where he said that God was at the helm. He also rescued a fisherman out of Chatham when he just let go of the wheel and the boat miraculously found the fisherman. So I know Bernie was a long time in there. I believe, it was prior to this rescue, coasties were known as shallow water sailors by the Navy. Not afterwards.
I would say so. Not after that.
Yeah.
Another question. What distances from land were the two vessels?
They started about 20 miles out.
Okay.
And the Pendleton, as you saw, was actually at one point visible from shore, and they could see shore.
Right.
And that is portrayed very well in the movie. There is one, Bernie Weber actually wrote Into the Raging Sea, and that covers much more of his career, and it is a wonderful read as well.
Mm-hmm. We have a question.
By the by, you are seeing that screen?
Yes.
Okay, good.
There's another question. What is a lightship?
It is a navigational aid, just, like a lighthouse, but it's out in the water, floating. Nantucket Lightship is probably the most famous. There was one off of New York City as well. They've largely, almost, I think, entirely have been replaced by fixed automated aids to navigation. I know the Sandy Hook is now a automated fixed
Right.
aid to navigation. But yeah, they were just another item for the ships to see to confirm their location.
Exactly. The museum used to have an exhibit about lightships. We took it down in late 2020 to be replaced by an exhibit all about the Portland Gale, which is, one of these things that I was thinking about while you're speaking about the storm and how it turned into this sort of cataclysmic event. The Portland Gale was very similar, and it's this sort of conjoining of terrible weather systems that turn into these bomb cyclones. All right, so a question from Susan. Where are you a librarian? On the Cape?
Well, my bachelor's degree is in computer engineering. My master's degree was in library and information science. And actually right now I am a makerspace teacher at an all-boys boarding school in Pauling.
And where you're sitting right now, where are you?
I'm in the classroom of the Cape Cod Maritime Museum.
It's like we've switched
Neil the
location.
Seal.
So another comment, people have no ideas about the Chatham bars. Can you please elaborate what makes them so dangerous?
Well, what makes them so dangerous is they're never in the same place twice. They are sandbars, and you may notice on the shore that out in the deeper water, the waves are nice and rolly, and as you get into shallower water, they kind of build up and curl.
Mhm.
Now imagine that these waves are building up and curling 70 feet tall. I have actually learned that in the movie The Finest Hours, they play down how bad the waves were compared to what they did experience.
Hmm.
So the Chatham bars are constantly shifting. So you don't know, you have to be always right on your most aware when you're going out from Chatham Harbor, because the sandbar could be over here, could be over here. Who knows from day to day?
Wonderful. Well, on that note, my assistant here is getting into his candy. So if anyone
I'll be
else
right
has
over.
any, right. This is Ted. He's my 5-year-old little guy. You want to say hi to everybody?
Hi.
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 So, Bob, this was phenomenal. Thank
you.
so much. And of course, thank you so much to Megan for making this happen. A great question from Bob Young in the Q&A is, how can we make donations towards the building of the structure around CG 36500?
I would contact the Orleans Cultural and Historical Society directly.
Perfect.
Let's see.
All right.
See, do I
Yeah.
have anything there in that?
Centers
No.
for Culture and History in Orleans.
Yes. I want to say they're looking to raise something close to $3 million.
Okay. All for a good cause, to keep
Yes.
that vessel preserved, which is very important. All right. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us. Our next event will be in a few more weeks, and it will be a very exciting one. So, of course, keep tuned to our website to see what's going on and what our lectures will be all about. And of course, we also have a very robust calendar of events coming up. We have Geotaku and SIPS tomorrow night. We have a few more events coming up as well. So stay tuned to our calendar. Keep your eye on what we do. And of course, all of our Zoom lectures are free. We do recommend that you reserve a spot so you can watch it live, but we do put these up on YouTube later. So if you missed a bit, if you want to recap, you can check us out on YouTube as well. All right, and thanks everybody, and thank you so much, Bob. You've been amazing.
Very welcome.
All right, bye everybody.
Okay.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.